as Program Manager at the Southern Africa Litigation Center, SALC for short, where he leads the efforts to defend and promote fundamental freedoms such as expression, assembly, and association in the region. Melusi is the founder and former director of Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities, the country's first membership-based LGBTQ organization. Jump in.
Thank you. As I was coming up here, Virginia was saying, this is what democracy looks like. And I was thinking, God, I want to know what it looks like, where I come from. No, jokes aside, I'm Melusi Simelane. I'm from the kingdom of Eswatini. Very democratic, so forget about my joke. But look, to the question of this anti-gender and anti-rights movement, I think it's about creating confusion, right? And my fellow panelists have sort of said it all. I feel like I'm at a point where I can just say, I can't care. And then we can all pray for the day. But no, look, I think they are trying to make us think that rights are a Western imposition. They're trying to make us think that freedom is a threat. They're trying to make us think that freedom is chaos. They're trying to make us think that equality is a threat. And this is precisely why we need to come together. But I wanted to give you a very quick example of how the anti-rights movement is dangerous, not only for my fellow queer panelists. I'm queer as well, for those who haven't said. But it's a danger for the bigger civic space, because I'll tell you what, we are currently facing a situation in Swaziland, forgive me, Eswatini, Swaziland, where a plane landed on the 17th, 16th of July with individuals coming from the United States. Now, there was a deal that was struck between the governments, right? And what the anti-rights movement is trying to do is trying to erode democratic institutions. And I'll tell you how that is playing out in real time. This deal is being struck between our governments, and they're bringing these individuals to be housed in our correctional services who are under-resourced, our correctional services who are overcrowded. Now, there's already a conversation about human rights here, but the anti-rights movement is going to tell you that forget about the human rights. These are people who belong in jail. Forget about the human rights. How dare you want to defend people who belong in jail? But even people who belong in jail, they deserve the Mandela rules, which is the UN standards of minimum treatment. And I'll tell you why I'm speaking mostly about prisoners' rights. It's because as an organization, we're currently working with the SADC-PF, where we are saying, let's develop modern laws, where as civil society, as the judiciary, as legislators, we are going to constantly work with the government to make sure that our fellow people who are in prisons are remembered, that they are treated with dignity. And the anti-rights movement is trying to erode all of these institutions so that they can continue to trample on the rights of those who are on the very margins. I'm not trying to shift the conversation away from the queer conversation, because in Eswatini, as an example, they've denied us registration. That's another attack by the anti-rights and anti-gender movement, who are saying we are not going to allow you the right to associate, particularly because you are queer. And it's not an attack only on the queer community. We're seeing it in countries like Tanzania, where they're deregistering media houses. Now you see that this attack is not solely on us as queer people. You might look at us and think, oh, there they come again with the anti-gender, anti-rights conversation, because they think queer rights are all there. But it's an attack on all of us. It's an attack on the civic space broadly. My colleague from Eswatini, Temkosi, the director of the Coordinating Assembly, can testify that in Eswatini we've got an NGO bill that is already looking so terrible, because it's the anti-gender and anti-rights movement that's trying to attack civic space by capturing legislation. I'm sure you can all talk about examples that you're seeing in your country where they are capturing your state using legislation, whether it's through the flow of financing. There is the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is looking at the recommendation 8 around the flow of money, where they're saying NGOs shouldn't receive X amount of money because they are financing terrorism. That's capture by the anti-rights movement trying to shut us down as civil society. But they are not ending on the laws alone. They are capturing our institutions, as I opened earlier. They are capturing our judiciaries. It's becoming more difficult for us to go to courts and litigate because these judiciaries are starting to have conversations that are somewhat similar and mirroring what we are seeing as the anti-gender and anti-rights movement. Just this morning I was having a conversation with colleagues, and I must send a shout out to my colleagues because they are watching us live on the Facebook page. We were watching a conversation on media around one of the justices of the International Court of Justice who was saying she feels that God has appointed her to stand on the side of Israel. Now, I'm not going to pontificate and say who is wrong here, but I know when I see a genocide happening. And I know when South Africa goes to the International Criminal Court of Justice and wants justice to prevail, that the anti-gender and anti-rights movement is going to creep in by trying to capture these institutions. And now we are seeing Justice Sebatunde, the Ugandan judge, who is actually the vice president of that court, starting to speak like this. So my point is that we really need to look at the anti-gender and anti-rights movement as an attack to all of us, because it's coming for the queer movement right now, but it's coming for us tomorrow. I'm reminded of, I forget these people who are always quoted in big books. Someone apparently said they first came for the communists. I said I'm not a communist, and then they came for the capitalists, and then they came. So I'm just saying we need to be careful of the anti-gender and anti-rights movement because it's here to erode our democratic institutions. If you allow me, Kutlwana, there is actually one last example. Just recently in Eswatini, we had a visit from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Guess one question that they asked us in that meeting? They said, so what is your guys' view on what democracy should look like with the African perspective? And I already thought to myself, this is the anti-gender and anti-rights movement that is trying to say democracy is not what our forefathers fought for to be the preamble of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. What our forefathers fought for to be on the preamble of the African Charter on Human Rights. They're trying to change that. So they're trying to change this narrative, which is what my fellow colleagues have been saying, to say, oh no, democracy must be Africanized, so that it's about African values. But what they mean is, we must exclude others so that we go back to, I don't know what.